We're going to start your notes over the Columbian Exchange and Global Trade. If you would like to follow along in your text, it is Chapter 20, Section 4, page 500 to 503. In class, we've been talking about European exploration of new lands, as well as European colonization and settlement of new lands. And today we are going to focus on the impact of the Columbian Exchange. The Columbian Exchange is just the phrase that is used to explain the global transfer of foods, plants, and animals during colonization of the Americas. The Columbian Exchange had a tremendous impact on the Americas as well as Europe because it encouraged economic growth with the emergence of new items and new goods in each of the areas. The Americas brought tomatoes, tobacco, pineapple, squash, as well as the cacao beans for making chocolate. They introduced those items to Europe. However, they also introduced two other items that are the most important items and became the most important items in the lives of Europeans, and those two things were corn and potatoes. And corn and potatoes tremendously improved the standard of living in Europe at that time because they were very inexpensive to grow. They were very nutritious. This helped boost the world population because now that people had a very cheap food to grow and live off of, people were living longer, they were living healthier. So the corn and potatoes actually tremendously improved the lives of the Europeans at the time. Europe also contributed some goods to the Americas, such as livestock, horses, pigs. They contributed bananas, black-eyed peas, and sugarcane. As you have talked about, especially when we talk about the slave trade, we know the impact that the sugarcane has on South America. So the introduction of that had a tremendous impact on the lives of the people in South America. So all of these goods were being traded with each other, and we don't know that. Sometimes the goods that are native to a certain area, such as potatoes in Ireland, were actually brought from European explorers from the Americas. This is just a chart that is actually in your textbook on page 501. This just shows how the different goods that were brought to and from the Americas through the Columbian Exchange. It shows that the Americas, they brought pumpkins, peanuts, potatoes, corn, cacao beans, pineapples, tobacco. Those were all traded to Europe, while as Europe brought things such as fruit, grapes, bananas, sugarcane, coffee beans, olives, certain grains, and livestock. But as you'll notice over here, the Europeans brought something else to the Americans. There are some downsides to the Columbian Exchange, and that was disease. Along with some of these goods that really helped sustain people in the Americas, they also brought some things that hurt people in the Americas, and that is disease. The most tragic of those diseases was smallpox. That was the disease that was wiping out millions of Native Americans at an incredibly fast rate. This is what the European explorers were bringing over. The Native Americans had never built up an immunity to these diseases. They could not ward off the diseases, so millions of the Native Americans were dying. We even talked about that's why the West African people were becoming more and more attractive as laborers for the Europeans' colonies because the Native American population was dying off extremely quickly due to disease. This picture down here is a Native American drawing that depicts someone dying of smallpox. And if you've never seen anyone who has smallpox, it'd be an interesting thing for you to Google. Basically, people just get whelps all over their body, and if they do not die from smallpox at a very, very young age, then they are usually scarred for life. So it was a pretty deadly, tragic disease. The Columbian Exchange did some pretty good things for the economy in Europe. Basically, what it sparked was a commercial revolution. All of this wealth in the Americas and overseas trade kind of sparked this commercial revolution and opened up the European nations to an idea of capitalism or free enterprise. Capitalism is just an economy that's based on private ownership and investing wealth for profit instead of the government having all of the wealth and investing all that wealth. No governments were no longer in charge of the economy, and they were no longer the sole owners of the wealth. Now with capitalism, private merchants were investing their money into business ventures and trade, and in turn making a profit because of that investment. Colonization and trade brought exuberant wealth to all these merchants, and with all that wealth, merchants could then invest more money and in turn get a larger profit. All of this money coming into these European nations led to the increase of money supply, in turn leading to inflation. The more money supply a nation has, the more spending money people have, the more demand there is for goods. When the demand is high and yet the supply is low, that causes inflation. That causes prices to rise. And if you're not real sure what inflation means, that just means the steady rise of prices. The rise of prices of goods. Another thing that came out of the Columbian exchange and capitalism was the idea of having a joint stock company. And a joint stock company works much like a normal modern day corporation. It basically involves a number of people pooling together their resources and pulling together their money to contribute to a common business or a common venture or a common purpose. A joint stock company, basically all the members would get together, put a fraction of their money in, and they would invest either in an expedition, invest in a colonization, or invest in a business. Joint stock companies were actually used for early American colonization. Each member of the company only had to contribute a fraction of the cost because these voyages to America were pretty risky. There was no guarantee that a ship was going to make it to the Americas, that they were going to have that long journey, that they were going to be successful once they got there. So that's what made having a joint stock company perfect for colonization. Each member of the joint stock company could put in a little bit of money for the expedition, and if it was a failure, then only a fraction is lost. Virginia Company out of England, this is their seal right here. Actually, that was the joint stock company that settled Jamestown in 1607. So, joint stock company was part of the foundation of our nation. Another thing that became kind of popular during this time after the commercial revolution was the theory of mercantilism. And mercantilism is basically the idea that a country's power is dependent on wealth. Wealth became the goal of every country. Wealth could be obtained, the ways it could be obtained was acquiring gold and silver from your colonies and by establishing a favorable balance of trade. A favorable balance of trade just means more goods are being exported than are being imported. Basically, as a nation, you are selling and trading more than you're having to bring in. So that meant that you established a system of self-sufficiency, that you were able to live off of the goods from your colonies or from on your own land, and you were trading goods out to other people. That is creating a favorable balance of trade. So the trade balance is in your favor. In order for you to have a favorable balance of trade and to have mercantilism be successful, you had to have colonies. And we all have talked about that colonies are just lands that are controlled by other nations. The system of mercantilism pretty much depended on having colonies. Colonies were there, they could provide more raw materials than is found in a home country. This increased exports. You were able to export more goods because you were getting goods from the home country as well as colonies. It also provided a market for goods to be exported to from the home country. if the colonies needed certain goods, they would get them from the home country, and that was increasing the exports for the home country. And also they provided gold and silver. So having a colony was a way to build wealth, was an extremely good way to maintain this idea of mercantilism. And hopefully you've heard that term before, because we talk about mercantilism with the American colonies in England, how England basically abused that system and were able to create that favorable balance of trade with the Americas. Some of the ways that Europe changed after the new economic system, after the commercial revolution, there was a rise in the merchant class. People were getting very rich off of all of the trade. There was a huge growth in cities and towns. People were moving into the cities. Also, the wealth of the European nations went up tremendously. Now, while it looks like the European nations gained and got so much wealth from all of these changes, it is important to know that the European people, not all of them gained from this wealth. There were still a huge number of people that were living in rural areas, and there were also other Europeans that remained poor. The commercial revolution really just increased the wealth of European nations. Okay, that's all for notes for right now. We are going to, if you will bring that to class next time we meet, that will finish up chapter 20.